Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I will be demonstrating how to crochet the Handkerchief Cocoon, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description. There you will find a link that takes you to both right and left-handed video tutorials, and right under those videos you will find a link to the written pattern as well as all the supplies you need. To make the Handkerchief Cocoon, you need a USI 5.5mm hook. This one is by Furls, or whatever gets you gauge. And you will need a whole bunch of Peyton's Grace, which you can see here in 2 colors, or of course you can do it in 1 or as many colors as you like. I used Citadel, which is the pretty blue, and Snow, which is the white. Now, this pattern comes in 4 sizes that cover extra small all the way through 6X. So you'll want to look at the pattern to get the exact row counts and stitch numbers and things for your size. I will be making a small swatch today, and if you look at these photos of the Handkerchief Cocoon being modeled, you will see the size extra large / 2X modeled by me. You can see that this is a slightly oversized garment, so it's pretty difficult to show the whole thing on the table, but hopefully this gives you a good idea of how it looks, and this tutorial should show you how it comes together. So, as you can see here, the Handkerchief Cocoon is made from the center out, and it starts as just a really big granny square. I do use all my favorite tricks to make this granny square as good as it can be, but after you've got the granny square made for your size, and again, you'll want to refer to the written instructions for how much yarn you need for your size and exact row counts for your size, but after you've made the granny square, you just go around the granny square and work this solid edging right here. And the trick to this solid edging is that we've got a couple extra stitches here in the corners. And now if we were trying to make a blanket or something, this would be awful because it's causing it to flare out at the corners like this. But for this garment, it turns out to be a really, really good thing. What this does is gives us a little extra length along the borders, and it gives us a much flatter section here along both the shoulders and, more importantly, the rear end. It just creates a much flatter, looser, and I think a slightly better fitting cocoon. If we take a look at the schematic here, you can kind of see what that looks like. So here we have the Handkerchief Cocoon schematic, and you can see it has the measurements for the 4 different sizes. Here we have that inner granny square I was talking about, nice and square. So if you're making the smallest size, which would be extra small or small, you would make that until it's 15 inches across and 15 inches up and down. We don't take that as a diagonal measurement. That's along the edges. For the next size up, which would then be medium large, you would need 17 inches. For extra large 2X, 19. For 3 or 4X, 21. And for 5 or 6X, 23. Then, like I say, we add that solid border, which you can see right here, just double crochets. You can see here I've kind of tried to draw in, and it's probably not exactly to scale, but it gives you that idea of how those corners should really flare out. And of course, the measurement right here is different, but this measurement right here gives you the sort of that in the middle of the granny square right to the section where it's straightest, we'll say, before it flares out. That's adding an additional 4 inches, 5, 5.5, 6, or 6.5 inches on each side there. So depending on which of these 5 sizes you're making, your dimensions will be a little different, but basically the instructions will all be the same. Now you can see the wiggly lines here. That indicates where we sew it. So we make the whole thing flat. We're working in the round, but of course we're working in a flat sort of motif style. And then we need to do some seaming to turn it into a cocoon. So you'll basically fold it in half, and it doesn't really matter if you do it this way or this way. All these sides are the same. So you could turn it. You don't have to worry about finding just the right way to fold it in half. Just fold it in half and sew up one side and then the other. And again, you can refer to the instructions for exactly how far to sew for each size. But you just make a little seam there. And then you've got the armholes right here, and then you can say your neck and waist are right here. So let's go ahead and get stitching on our Handkerchief Cocoon. Okay, so as I said, we start with our granny rounds right in the middle. So for round 1, we're going to start with a magic circle. And again, I do have a separate tutorial for this on the Moogly YouTube channel and linked at the link in the description. So to make a magic circle, I'm going to go around my non-hook hand forefinger twice towards me. So once towards me, and there's the second time. Then I'm going to insert my hook under both of those loops, grab the one that's furthest back there, the first one I made, pull it just under that one. You can see I've got that tail end secured there with my fingers. Then I'll yarn over, pull that loop through, and that's just going to hold our magic circle together. I'm not going to count that as a chain or anything like that. Then I'm going to go ahead and start with a chainless starting double crochet. And if you don't like the chainless starting double crochet, you can use a chain 3 as a double crochet substitute, or whatever you like to do to start your double crochet rows and rounds. So what I'm going to do here is make my chainless starting double crochet. Again, there is a separate tutorial for this if you need it, but I start by pulling my loop up to the height of a double crochet. Then I secure that loop on my hook with this finger. So then I yarn over with the loop itself, go into the magic circle, yarn over with my working yarn, pull that loop through, yarn over, pull through that loop, and behind the loop that I wound around my hook, yarn over again, and then I can finally release that loop under my finger there, pull through both of those, and I've made my chainless starting double crochet. Now, sometimes it takes a couple tries to really get one I like, and that's okay. I think it's worth it for the look it gives me. I think it looks a lot more like a double crochet than a chain 3 does. It avoids that gap you can get sometimes when you use a chain 3, but of course you can use whichever method you prefer. So after you've got that first double crochet, however you want to make it, go ahead and work 2 more double crochets in that ring. And for each of these stitches in the ring, you want to make sure that you go under the loop around your finger and under that tail end, because we're going to want to pull that tail end to close up our ring when we're done. And it won't work if we don't go under that one as well. So there's one more, and my ring should be stabilized enough to pull my finger out. So there we go. Now I can go ahead and pull my finger out of that magic circle, and I've got my first 3 double crochets. Now, one other thing I want to do right here, I'm going to go ahead and grab a stitch marker. And I am a big fan of putting a stitch marker under the top 2 loops there of that chainless starting double crochet. It just makes it a lot easier to find when I come back around to join to it at the end of this round. So I will go ahead and leave that stitch marker there and continue on with round 1. So we've got our chainless starting double crochet, our 2 double crochets, and then we're going to do a repeat. And if you're following along with the written instructions, this would be in the parentheses 3 times. Here's that repeat. Chain 2, 1, 2, and then 3 double crochets in the ring. So again, we want to make sure we go around that ring and that tail end there when we make these. This yarn is a little bit thinner. It is a 3 weight, so sport weight. So it takes a little bit more time sometimes to work with the thinner yarns if you're not used to working with anything smaller than a worsted. But I really love working with this yarn, especially for summer weight garments. It's just really lovely. Anything summery or lightweight with great drape. So I've got my 3 double crochets there. I've chained 2 more, so we'll go back in to make 3 more double crochets. And essentially, if you've made a granny square before, you're probably familiar with what I'm doing here. I am making 4 groups total of 3 double crochets into the ring with chain 2 corners in between. And you'll see here what I mean in a minute if you're not familiar with those. So I've got 3 double crochets. I'll chain 2 again. And then I want to get 3 more of those double crochets worked right into this ring. So there's 1, 2, and 3. And then I've got my 4 sets of 3 double crochets. You can see there's 3, 3, 3, 3. There's my 4 sets. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and pull on that tail end, just start closing up the center of that square. And you can see how that closes up that circle in the middle. Normally, though, when I pull on it, I really like to stabilize it as I pull it with my other hand so you can't see it, but you can feel it happening. So I'll go ahead and pull that in tight. And then when I weave in my ends, I'll make sure to weave this in back and forth a couple different directions along that circle so that it doesn't come back out. So now that we've got those 4 sets of 3 double crochets done, it's time for our join. And a lot of times when you make a granny square or anything else like a motif like this, you might chain 2, just like we've done in the other corners, and join with a slip stitch. I'm going to do this one a little differently because I want to land in the middle of this chain space, and I don't want to have to slip stitch into that space. So I'm going to use a little trick here. I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to half double crochet in the top of that first stitch. Now this half double crochet is not going to count as a stitch for our pattern. It just creates, There we go. It creates that chain 2 space while putting me back in the middle of that space. So essentially, if you're looking at the stitch counts, you're not going to see that half double crochet counted the same way you wouldn't see a slip stitch counted if I had joined with a slip stitch. So with that half double crochet made, we are done with our first round, and we have 12 double crochets total. Now, the first trick we used to make this granny square a little better was using the chainless starting double crochet. And the second trick was joining with a stitch that puts us back in the middle of that chain space. The next trick that I like to use for my granny squares and that I use for the handkerchief cocoon is I'm going to turn and work the next round from the opposite side of the square. What this does is it prevents the granny square from getting that tilt or twirl that can so often happen when you work a granny square all from the same side. Because crochet stitches lean in one direction, you can get a twisted look if you keep going bigger and bigger with a granny square. For small ones, you might not notice it. The bigger you get, the more pronounced that effect's going to be. So if we turn after each round and work it from the opposite side, that evens out that lean. So one row or round rather will lean one direction, the next round will lean the other, and we'll even it out and give us a really nice, beautiful straight square. So now that I've turned and I've got my tail end sticking out, so I can always tell I'm on that opposite side there, I am ready for round 2. And it's going to start really similarly to the way we did round 1. We're going to start with a chainless starting double crochet, and that's like how I like to start all my rounds for this pattern. So again, you can use whatever substitute you prefer if you don't like this one. So I'll pull up my loop, secure it with my finger, yarn over. Now I'm going to go just into that chain space, because remember, it's a half double crochet in chain 1. We're going to call it a chain 2 space. We're going to treat it just like the other corners. So we're going to go right in that space and make our chainless starting double crochet. And I'm going to go ahead, and now that I've worked into that one, it's easy enough, but I'm going to use a different stitch marker. I like having lots of my stitches marked when I'm making things. It just makes it so much easier. There we go. So I've got my stitch marker in the top of that one. Then I am going to work 2 more double crochets right in that same chain space. So there's 1 and 2. Then I will chain 1, skip over all the next 3 double crochets right there. And then in the next chain 2 space, I'm going to work 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So this part, again, if you're familiar with granny squares, sounds very familiar, I'm sure. So we've got 3 double crochets there, right in that chain 2 space. Then we chain 2, 1, 2, and work 3 more right in that same chain 2 space. And as I say, we're going to the space here, not into the chains themselves. You don't want to do that. One of the joys of working the granny stitch or granny squares is that you are working into these spaces. Whether there's an actual chain space there or just in between your chain or your 3 double crochet groups. It makes it so much faster than trying to work into a bunch of individual chains. So I've got my 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in my chain 2 corner, and then I'm going to chain 1, skip these next 3 stitches right there, and do it again, because that takes me to the next corner. So 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in the corner, then chain 1 to skip over that 3 double crochet group in the middle. And that's what we're going to continue doing here as we work our way around round 2. So I will meet you when we get to that last corner of round 2. Okay, so you can see here I've worked my way around the square. In each of those next 3 corners, I've got 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, then a chain 1 onto the next corner, all the way around. So I've chained 1, I'm ready to skip my last group of 3 double crochets. I'm going to go ahead and take that stitch marker out of the way, since I don't need to worry about working into any of those stitches. That's done. So that brings us to our very final corner there. That's the one we started in. So I am going to make 3 double crochets in there, just like we started all our other corners. So 1, 2, and 3. There we are. But then to join that corner, I want to use the same little trick that I used in round 1. So I'm going to chain 1 and half double crochet right in that marked stitch. So let me pull that end there out of the way, grab my stitch marker so I can find the top of that stitch there. Sometimes it likes to hide on me. Another reason I like to have those stitch markers in there, I can just kind of give that a tug and find those top 2 loops if I need to. There we are. Yarn over and pull through, make my half double crochet, and we have finished round 2. And you can see how joining with that stitch puts you sort of in that middle of that chain space there, so you don't have to slip stitch into it when you turn. So now I can go ahead and take that stitch marker out, because I know I'm not going to be working into any of those stitches, not till I get to the border, and we will be ready for round 3. Okay, so to begin round 3, we need to remember to finish round 2 that we turn. You always want to turn your rounds in this pattern. So round 3 begins just the same way as round 2, because again, we're just making a granny square. It's just a little bit fancier. We're going to start with our chainless starting double crochet again, and 2 more double crochets right in that corner chain 2 space. And for this pattern, until we get to that border, all our corner chain 2 spaces, of course, will be 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. So we're starting this corner just like we did in round 2. So I will go ahead and get my stitch marker there in that chainless starting double crochet while those top 2 loops are easiest to see. There we are. So that is secure. And then I am going to chain 1, skip the next 3 double crochets, just as we did before. Now we've got that chain 1 space. We're just going to go ahead and work 3 double crochets right in that chain 1 space in between our groups. So some granny square patterns that you've seen may not have that chain 1 space there. Some do. I chose to use it in this one. But don't let that throw you. If you're following another granny square pattern and it tells you to just work in between the groups, that's fine too. There are just little slight differences in granny squares, but the basic idea, as you can see, is all the same. So we've worked our 3 double crochets there in between those 2 groups in our chain 1 space. So now we chain 1, skip this next 3 double crochet group, and that lands us right back in a corner chain 2 space. So what do? 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So there's 1, 2, and oops. This light stuff takes a little bit of adjustment when you've been crocheting with a bulkier weight for the previous few hours. There we go. 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, right back in that chain 2 space. There we are. And then once again, we chain 1, skip these next 3, and work 3 double crochets right in that chain 1 space. 1, 2, and 3. And then we chain 1, and that brings us right to our next corner where you know what to do. So we're going to continue working all the way around. You can get an idea of what that looks like here. Our granny stitch square is really growing. So we're going to come all the way back around till we get to that corner we began in again, and I will join you when we're there. Okay, so here we are at the end of round 3, and you can see I've put my 3 double crochets right in that same chain 2 space corner that we began in. So we want to finish it off just as we've done our previous rounds. We chain 1 and half double crochet right in the top of that first stitch, however you made it, like so. And then we can, of course, pull out that stitch marker. It's done its job. So the next rounds 4 through however big your granny square needs to be, are all basically the same. They're going to keep getting bigger, of course. When we're working out like this, they have to. But basically, it's just a matter of putting 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in each of those corners, with, of course, that special join in the last one. And then a chain 1 to skip over the groups, and 3 double crochets in each of those chain 1 spots. So let's go ahead and start round 4 together, but hopefully you're getting the basic idea. Now, of course, the one thing we want to make sure we do is turn before we begin that next round. Start again with our chainless starting double crochet right back in that chain space. Oops. There we go. Go ahead and put your stitch marker in the top of that stitch. Get the hook back in the loop there. 2 more double crochets right in that same chain 2 space, 1 and 2. Then we chain 1, skip that next group of 3 double crochets there, and work 3 double crochets right in that next chain 1 space. There's 2 and 3. There we are. Chain 1 again. Skip the next group of 3 and work 3 double crochets in the next chain 1 space. And you'll just continue doing that across, of course, until you get to that next chain 2 corner, which, because we are on only round 4, we've reached already. Don't forget to chain 1 to skip that last group of 3 And then of course 3 double crochets and chain 2 and 3 double crochets right back in that corner. So you just continue that on till you've got enough rounds for your size. And I'm going to go ahead and put this down for a second and pull up our schematic and our instructions so I can show you one of the really cool tricks to this pattern. Okay, if we look at the written instructions here, you can see for the different sizes how many granny rounds you're going to work. So for the smallest size, it's 15. Next up is 17, 19, 21, or 23. Again, depending on which size you're making. Now, if you remember those numbers and come back over here to the schematic, if you've gotten gauge, you are basically adding an inch for every round. So 15, 17, 19, 21, and 23, the exact same numbers for the number of rows. So that's just really cool. Now, what that means, though, if you're not getting gauge, don't fret. Just work to those dimensions for your granny square. So if you need to substitute yarn, if you're using something heavier or even something lighter, so that you're not going to get gauge or you're just not getting the gauge, as long as you're making a nice square of granny stitches, just work to these dimensions. If you are getting gauge, it's a really fun trick that it ended up being the same numbers, but otherwise don't worry about it. Just make sure you work to those dimensions. There is one more trick with the numbers here for the assembly and the border, but I'll show you that when we're finished. Okay, so you can see here I have finished up round 4, but as I say, the next several rounds are all going to be the same. They're just going to grow a little bit with an extra cluster on every side every time you add another round. So when you have worked however many rounds for the center granny square portion of your handkerchief cocoon, then it's time for the border rounds. So I'm going to go ahead and turn because we'll do that before we begin our border rounds. And then they're all going to start the same again for all colors. So it's just going to be a matter of how many rounds you do for each size, but they're all going to be the same. We're going to start here for round 1. Again, we're going to be working into that chain 2 space in the corner here. And we've got our chainless starting double crochet, of course, to begin. So I will work that right into my corner here, like so. Go ahead and get my stitch marker in there. This time we will be working right into these stitches, so that stitch marker will be particularly handy. There we go. Then I want to work 2 more double crochets right back into that corner space there. There we are, 1 and 2, like so. And then we are going to double crochet in each stitch and chain 1 space to the next chain 2 space, which would be in the corner. So we simply double crochet in each stitch and each chain 1 space. So work right into the tops of those double crochets. There we are. Make sure you get each one. And then you can go right into that chain 1 space, just like we were doing before. You don't have to worry about trying to go into that individual chain. There we are. And then right back into those double crochets. So you're just going to work evenly in double crochet until you get to that next chain 2 corner. And in the chain 2 corner, just as before, 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So we're going to keep going all the way around just as before. When we get to that last corner, chain 1 and half double crochet to finish it out. But then we're going to change colors if we want a stripy border. So I'll see you when we get to that last corner of round 1. Okay, so I have finished the first round of my border and I've got my chain 1 and I'm ready to join with my half double crochet. But as you may remember from the original, this is where I change colors. I like to put some stripes in my borders. So if you're sticking with the same color throughout or using a self-striping yarn, you don't need to do this part. But if you are going to change colors, then what you want to do is start that half double crochet. When you have 3 loops left on the hook, you're ready for that last yarn over and pull through. That's when you'll grab your new color. I happen to use white here. I know it's a little hard to see against the table, so I'm not going to crochet much with it, but just to show the changing of colors here, just yarn over with your next color and finish that last stitch with the new color there, like so. And then you can turn and continue crocheting the next round with the new color. One thing you'll notice is that can pull that loop up a little high. It's not a problem. Just find that working yarn there. It doesn't want to show itself. There we go. You can just give those loops a tug down and sort of re-straighten out that the size of that stitch as needed. So then you would just turn. And like I said, I don't want to crochet with the white because I know it's really hard to see here against the table, but you would just turn and basically the corners are the same. 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in each corner, double crochet straight across. This time we don't have to work into any chain spaces. We're just putting a double crochet in each stitch till we get to that next chain 2 corner, work our corner again, all the way around, join with our special join, and turn. So like I was saying, the number of rounds for your solid border here will depend on the size you're making, either 8, 10, 11, 12, or 13 rounds. And you'll notice that some of those are odd and some of those are even. That's because this pattern is so very reversible. So whatever side you end up working your last round from, and if you have to change the number of rounds, again, that's fine too. You want to just work to the dimensions in the schematic. So whatever round or row you end up making for your last round, that round then becomes the right side of your garment. That's the round you'll want facing out when you do your seaming. Other than that, it doesn't really matter. And honestly, probably only an experienced crocheter is going to notice if you've got that last round right side out or wrong side out, so to speak, as you're wearing it. But like I say, it's a really reversible garment. So you could probably even just put the whole thing on wrong side out and nobody would be able to know unless they're another crocheter. But I do want to point out here on our small swatch before we talk more about assembly, you can already see how the corners here are starting to flare out. On these solid rounds, having 3, chain 2, 3 in the corners there is actually a bit much, and it's causing our square to flare. Now, our inner granny square needs to be nice and straight, but this border should absolutely start flaring out at the corners, and it should keep going as you make it. Okay, so here I've got my small swatch, which I'm going to pretend is the full finished sweater. You can see here, by the way the stitches are laying, that this is my final round facing up. So I'm going to flip it over now so that it's so to speak, wrong side up. I've got the underside or the back of that final round showing. And I'm just going to show you, basically all we do is fold it in half like this. Could be like that, could be like that, doesn't really matter. Fold it in half, however you want to do it. And then we're just going to do the seams like you saw in the schematic. And I do mention that you can cut that final tail of your final round extra long. Then you've got one less end to weave in because you can use that tail to do the seaming on that side. Then you will need to cut a new piece of yarn and do the seaming on that side. So we seam both those sections here. And rather than demo the seaming, which is just a simple mattress stitch seam, and I do have a separate tutorial for that on the blog and on the YouTube channel here, let me just put a couple more stitch markers in each side so you get an idea of what that looks like after it's seamed. This will be a lot quicker here. There we go. So I'm just eyeballing it here, obviously, on our very small swatch. But after you've put those 2 seams in each side, then we can open it up. You can see here how that creates the shape of the sweater. We've got our little armholes here. We've got an opening here for your neck, your waist. Of course, it doesn't really matter if it's that way. It's totally even. It's a very flexible garment indeed. And one of the things I love about this is when you make that final round of your border and then do the seaming, there's nothing else left to do. That final round is your final border. So just do your seams right there and you'll be all finished. Now, like I say, there was one more fun trick to this. If I pull up these sheets here from our instructions, you can see here is the end of our assembly instructions. Using the mattress stitch, seam from each corner towards the fold for 4, 5, 5.5, 6, or 6.5 inches. So that means that's the length of that seam here, from the corner towards the fold, from the corner towards the fold. So those numbers, if they sound familiar, come right back up here to the schematic. That's the width of our border. Those are the same numbers. So let me pull up the finished sweater so you can see what I mean. Okay, so here is the full-size sweater, and you can see the flare that you really get in that striped border there. And I just gonna, like I say, it's too big to show really all on the table here, but you can see here's the fold. So if we come back down here to the corner, there's the seam that went from the corner up towards the fold. And what I wanted to show you is the really cool thing about those dimensions being the same is that you can eyeball or help you as a gauge. Let me turn it around here. It's kind of psychedelic here with all these stripes, isn't it? So the length of that seam is the same as the width of the border. So you can see how that sort of lines up with where our granny squares begin there, right there. So that can be a really helpful visual clue too, especially if you didn't want to follow the schematic or your gauge was so different from mine that you're sort of just, figuring it out as you go. Basically, you want to seam as wide as that border is so that that part lines up. And then you've got your armhole right there. You've got your body opening right here, and you've got that really nice loose border because of that extra flare to help it lay even more beautifully. Okay, so taking one last look at the written instructions here, I just want to point out that these are the sizes. So when you're following the instructions, if you're making the extra small, always follow the first number. If you're making the large, follow the second, extra large, third, etc., etc. And it helps to go through the pattern and circle the number in the brackets that applies to your size, just to make it a little bit easier. You'll see that bracket up here too for the number of balls of yarn you'll need. Again, this refers to size. For the extra small, you would need 3 of the blue and 2 of the white. For the largest size, you would need 7 of the blue and 3 of the white to finish this garment. And the other thing I wanted to point out, the dimensions on the schematic, which printed on the next page because of size, but the one I've been showing you all along are before blocking. And if you use the suggested yarn, the beautiful Peyton's Grace, it does grow a little bit after blocking. So I wanted to include the before blocking dimensions. So if you change yarns or use a yarn that doesn't grow, you're still going to get a garment that fits. If you use the Peyton's Grace or another yarn that does grow, it'll be just a little bit looser fitting. But it is an oversized positive ease garment, so that's totally fine. So that's how to crochet the Handkerchief Cocoon. I hope you'll give this pattern a try and that you'll give Peyton's Grace a try. I really enjoyed using this yarn for this garment. It's nice and light, making it a perfect transition or even summer garment for those chilly interiors. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Moogly YouTube channel. Have a great day, everybody.